Before Colin McRae made rallying cool on the PlayStation, before V-Rally conquered the arcade world, there was a forgotten example, a Japan exclusive rally game that beat them all to the starting line. But here's the mystery: why did this experimental title vanish into obscurity, while its competitors became legends? What made it so special that it secured the Olin Suspension brand license? And what critical gameplay flaws prevented it from becoming the rally king it could have been? Stick around, because we're about to uncover the fascinating story of the PlayStation's first ever rally attempt, reveal how it borrowed heavily from Sega Rally's playbook, and discover why sometimes being first doesn't always mean being the best. By the end, you'll understand why this rare rally game deserves recognition despite never leaving Japan. The PS1 has a vast selection of interesting racing games, with some of the best examples creating a blueprint for future games to follow. But here we're diving deep into the forgotten origins of an early rally game on the PlayStation, sharing a story that starts not with the legendary Colin McRae Rally, not with V-Rally, but with a game most people have never even heard of. Olin's Hyper Rally, released exclusively in Japan in 1996 by developer Harvest 1. This was the first rally game to ever grace Sony's PlayStation console, a full 2 years before Colin McRae would bring his flat-out philosophy to the platform, and over a year before V-Rally would conquer international markets of arcade racing. But if it was the first, why don't we remember it? What went wrong, or right, with this forgotten title, and why did it never escape Japan's borders? Today we're answering all of those questions as we explore this rare piece of early 3D arcade rally development, because sometimes the most interesting stories in gaming aren't about the champions, they're about the forgotten trailblazers who paved the way. To understand Hyper Rally, we need to talk about the year of 1995, specifically about one game that changed everything: Sega Rally Championship. When Sega's arcade masterpiece hit in 1995, it revolutionised how people thought about rally racing in video games. Before Sega rally games were mostly top-down affairs or basic checkpoint racers. Sega Rally gave us three-dimensional rally stages, surface deformation, drift physics, and that iconic announcer commentary, shouting iconic phases that I simply cannot replicate, no matter how much I'd like to try. The game's Saturn port became a system seller in 1995, and suddenly every developer wanted a piece of that rally pie. The problem: Sony's PlayStation didn't have a rally game, not one. The hardware was capable, the market was hungry, and Sega had just proven that there was gold in those gravel covered hills. Enter Harvest 1, a small Japanese developer that saw an opportunity. They secured a licensing deal with Öhlins, the legendary Swedish suspension manufacturer, a brand synonymous with rally and motorsport. This wasn't just any random title, this was going to be an officially branded rally experience. And on August 30th, 1996, Hyper Rally launched exclusively in Japan as the PlayStation's first ever rally racing game. Hyper Rally features tournaments across 4 distinct regions: Europe, Asia, Savannah and Sweden. Each location offers multiple circuits with varying terrains and conditions. The game includes 2 primary modes: a season mode, compete across all circuits in a championship format, accumulating points to win the overall title, and a single player mode, practice with any unlocked circuit, perfect for learning the layouts or just having a quick rally fix. But here's where things get interesting. Öhlins Hyper Rally offered both male and female driver options, progressive for 1996, and featured genuine basic car customization. You could select different parts from tyres to suspension adjustments to tune your vehicle's performance based on your driving style. The choice was yours. This level of customization was somewhat ambitious for such an early PS1 title, and showed Harvest 1 had some understanding of what rally enthusiasts wanted: depth, not just arcade thrills. The game provided multiple camera views, including external chase cams and an interior cockpit perspective. The cockpit view was particularly bold considering the PlayStation 1's limited polygon count. Every polygon spent on the dashboard was a polygon that you couldn't use for the track itself. But let's address the elephant in the room. Hyper Rally owes a massive debt to Sega Rally Championship. Like Sega Rally, Hyper Rally emphasised accessible arcade-style handling over simulation. This was rally racing for everyone, not just hardcore enthusiasts. You had multiple surface types. The game featured varying terrain that affected handling: gravel, tarmac, dirt. Does it sound familiar? Sega Rally surface deformation and handling changes were revolutionary, and Hyper Rally attempted to capture that same magic. It also featured a checkpoint system with time-based checkpoints, which kept the pressure on. forcing players to maintain speed while navigating treacherous terrain. Miss a checkpoint or run out of time and it's game over. You also did have access to vibrant, colourful environments. The visual style leaned heavily into Sega Rally's bright, saturated colour palette rather than attempting photorealism. This wasn't necessarily a bad thing. Sega Rally had proven the formula worked, and Harvest 1 was smart enough to build on that foundation rather than reinventing the wheel. The question was, could they execute it properly on the PlayStation's hardware?
Light 3. Left, and light 9.
If we look at the elements that did work, it had an ambitious scope. For a first generation PS1 title from a small developer, Hyper Rally was surprisingly ambitious. Multiple tournaments, customization options, varied environments. Harvest 1 clearly had big ideas. You also had surface variety, with different terrain types that genuinely affected handling. Racing through Swedish snow felt different from tearing across the Savannah dust track. It wasn't Sega Rally's level of sophistication, but you could feel the distinction. The Öhlins branding, while it might seem minor, but securing a real suspension brand license gave the game legitimacy. Öhlins was and still is a respected name in motorsport. Having their name on the cover suggested that this was meant to be more than just shovelware. And the presentation, which featured energetic music and attempted to capture that mid-90s arcade energy. While dated now, it would have felt contemporary in 1996. But if we also look at the elements that didn't work in the game, its Achilles heel essentially was the controls. And this is where Hyper Rally stumbled badly. The car handling felt loose and imprecise, lacking the weight and feedback that made Sega Rally so satisfying. Cars seemed to float above the track rather than grip to it, and steering inputs felt disconnected from the on-screen action. But you also have to remember that this was 1996. The DualShock controller with analog sticks wouldn't arrive until 1997 in Japan for the PlayStation. Most players were still using the digital D-pads, which made precise control difficult at the best of times. And even accounting for that, Hyper Rally's handling model just simply felt unfinished. It also had plenty of collision detection issues, which were inconsistent at best, catastrophic at worst. You could clip through scenery objects, while other times barely brushing a barrier would send you spinning wildly, even stopping dead in most cases. The game struggled to properly detect impacts, leading to frustrating moments where you'd lose momentum for seemingly no reason. This was particularly problematic in a genre where precision was everything. Rally racing demands split-second reactions and confidence in how your car will behave. Hyper Rally couldn't provide that consistency. The game also suffered from draw distance and severe popping. The PS1 was notoriously weak at distance geometry, and Hyper Rally suffered accordingly. Objects would pop into view with little warning, forcing you to memorise tracks rather than read them as you drove. This wasn't unusual for early PS1 racers, but it was particularly jarring in the rally context where anticipation was crucial. Even the track designs were seen as somewhat lackluster. While the game offered multiple circuits across 4 regions, the actual track layouts themselves were considered uninspiring. They lacked the memorable corners, elevation changes and dramatic moments that made Sega Rally stages so iconic. Everything just felt a bit generic. Aside from all those issues within the game, Hyper Rally was challenging, but not always for the right reasons. The time limits were strict, forcing aggressive driving, combined with imprecise controls and poor collision detection. This created frustration rather than satisfying difficulty. You weren't learning the subtleties of rally technique, you were fighting the game's systems. The AI opponents were serviceable but unspectacular. They followed racing lines without much variation, making them unpredictable once you learned the tracks. There was little of Sega Rally's aggressive dynamic AI that would challenge you differently throughout each race. Still, for determined players willing to master the quirks, there was a genuine championship to conquer. The season mode offered a decent career structure, and unlocking new circuits provided motivation to keep racing despite the flaws. Despite its problems, Hyper Rally deserves credit for several forward-thinking concepts. In 1996, most racing games offered preset cars with no modification options. Hyper Rally's part swapping system, while basic, hinted at the deep tuning mechanics that would become standard in later racing games. You could see the ambition, even if the execution was limited by the hardware and budget constraints. Offering both male and female driver options was genuinely progressive for the era. Rally racing in the mid-90s was overwhelmingly male-dominated, and most games reflected that. Harvest 1's decision to include female drivers showed thoughtfulness about their audience. Organising tournaments by geography rather than just simple progression of tracks gave the career mode structure and variety. Each region felt like a distinct challenge, not just palette swapped versions of the same circuits. And this might seem trivial now, but in 1996, securing a real-world motorsport licensing firm for a mid-tier title from a small developer was notable. It suggests that Harvest 1 had industry connections, and it took the subject matter seriously. So why did Hyper Rally never leave Japan? You could say that timing had a part to play in it, as it was released in August 1996, and by early 1997, V-Rally was already dominating the European market with superior graphics, handling, and a full WRC license. And then by later in 1998, Colin McRae Rally would arrive and completely redefine the standard for rally games moving forward. Harvest 1's window for opportunity was incredibly narrow, and the game's technical shortcomings meant it couldn't compete internationally. Publishers evaluating Hyper Rally for Western releases would have immediately compared it to Sega Rally, which had already been available for the Sega Saturn for well over a year. The PlayStation version desperately needed to match or exceed that quality, and it didn't even come close. The control issues, collision detection problems, and lackluster track design would have been deal breakers for international publishers looking for their rally game to compete in an increasingly crowded market. But you also have to remember that Harvest 1 was a small developer without the known resources or distribution network of companies like Namco, Sony, or even Codemasters. Without a major publisher backing an international release, Hyper Rally was destined to remain as a Japanese exclusive. While the Öhlins branding gave the name legitimacy in motorsport savvy markets, it also might have complicated licensing for international release. Negotiating regional rights and ensuring the Swedish brand was acceptable across different markets added complexity that a small developer might have found overwhelming. Here's the thing about Hyper Rally. Being first matters. Yes, it was flawed. Yes, better games came along and made it obsolete within months. But Öhlins Hyper Rally proved that rally racing could work on the PlayStation. It showed there was demand for off-road racing experiences on Sony's hardware. When Codemasters was developing Colin McRae Rally, they could look at Hyper Rally and see what worked. Surface variety, regional organisation, customization, and what didn't. Loose controls, poor collision detection, generic track design. They could learn from Harvest 1's mistakes. When Infogrames created V-Rally, they benefited from Hyper Rally having established that PlayStation owners wanted rally games. The market had already been tested. As a result, Hyper Rally represents a fascinating moment in PlayStation history. That experimental first year when developers were still figuring out the hardware strengths and limitations. The ambition was there, the ideas were there. The execution fell short because the tools, techniques and experiences weren't fully developed yet. But today, Hyper Rally is a genuine curiosity for collectors and historians. Complete copies with their Öhlins branded packaging are increasingly rare, and the game represents a what-if moment in rally gaming history. What if Harvest 1 had more time, more budget, more tools? What if they'd secured the WRC license instead of the Öhlins license? We'll never know, but it's fun to imagine. Öhlins Hyper Rally is not a good rally game by modern standards, or even by 1998 standards once Colin McRae Rally arrived. The controls are loose, the collision detection is problematic, and the track design lacks inspiration. But it is an important rally game. It's the first, the pioneer, the brave experiment that proved rally racing belonged on the PlayStation. And sometimes, being first means your most important contribution isn't what you achieve yourself, but what you enable others to build upon your foundation. Harvest 1 never became Codemasters. They never created a legendary franchise or redefined a genre. But on August the 30th of 1996, they gave PlayStation owners their first taste of rally racing, and that deserves recognition. And here is a key takeaway. Hyper Rally reminds us that gaming history isn't just about the classics we remember. It's also about the forgotten experiments and examples, the failed ambitions, and the small teams who tried something new, even knowing that they may not succeed. It's a fascinating piece of early 3D arcade rally development. Flawed? Absolutely. Interesting? Undeniably. Worth experiencing if you're a rally gaming historian or a PS1 collector? Without question. But should you play it? If you can read Japanese and have access to import hardware or emulation, Hyper Rally is worth an hour of your time, purely as a historical curiosity. You'll immediately understand why it never threatened Sega Rally's dominance, but you'll also appreciate the ambition and forward-thinking ideas buried beneath the technical limitations. Just remember that this is a museum piece now, not a rival to modern rally sims. Approach it with curiosity and historical perspective, not expectations of quality. Hyper Rally was just the beginning of the PlayStation's rally revolution. Over the next few years, the platform would become home to some of the greatest rally games ever made that would further develop the foundational blueprint for future games on later systems to thrive. If you enjoyed learning about this forgotten pioneer, stick around as more videos are on the way, covering Rally's rise to prominence on the console and other obscure PS1 racing titles you probably never heard of. The PS1 racing library is deeper and weirder than most people realise. and we are going to explore every corner of it. But now it's your turn. Have you ever experienced or played Dolan type of rally? Did you even know it existed? What are your favourite obscure PS1 racing games from this generation? Drop your thoughts down in the comments below, as I love to hear from fellow racing game enthusiasts who appreciate these deep cuts and forgotten gems that brought so many great memories to players across the world. And if you did enjoy this deep dive into the PlayStation's first rally game, then be sure to like, subscribe and hype the video, as there will be plenty more nostalgic trips through the PS1's racing history coming your way. And also feel free to check out my Patreon page if you're also interested in supporting the channel for even more exclusive behind the scenes content of interesting PS1 games just like this. And remember, sometimes first has its own reward, even if nobody remembers you were there. Now go play some rally games, maybe even this one, and if you're feeling adventurous, you can also check out this next video right here. And as always, keep those gaming memories alive.